Kelly, he's gone. Oh, cheers, everybody. Gosh.
Cheers! Here's to us doing a cultural event today. Welcome you all. I'm Linda Rocco and I'm the co-curator with Kelly of which is Scamps and Things, which is Kelly's solo show, supported by Arts Council England. So today we're going to have kind of an informal chat and maybe a hour, and then we're going to open up some questions. And I'm going to check my phone. It's not because I'm texting with anybody, it's actually in airplane mode, but just because I have some notes, so if I forget something, I'm just going to have a quick look. So we've been discussing this show for a long time, actually, almost a year now.
Yeah.
And it was coming with this huge program of events, which is still happening. So we have a program for young people and for adults, which despite the lockdown is kind of working anyway. Obviously we were expecting big kind of schools, groups and stuff, but it wasn't possible. But we're doing what we can, and the show probably will continue being open during this new lockdown, because we were supposed to close on the 8th of November, but obviously it's going to be impossible. But you know, the fact that it is also kind of a window gallery, I think gives still some chances to somehow see the show in different ways. I've been working on the exhibition text for, again, quite a long time, and it was for me interesting to look into Kelly's practice and what she's been doing in the past 10 years, more or less, even though in here we just have works from 6 years ago. Kelly is living in this pantheon of supernatural creators. I found very fascinating the way in which she talks about them, as if there was some sort of like pulse that she goes around with. And I thought of beginning today first with paint, which in the text I say, sorry, my mask is getting blurry, my sunglasses. In the text I say that you bless everything through paint, and that's mainly because she's not only a painter, but when she develops sculptures or drawings and films, she always has this component of paint, using paint as kind of a blessing, but also as almost like your own favorite and preferred media. So talking about the painting, even looking at the titles, we have the Tooth Fairy here, we have rabbits, dogs, Moon Angel, Space Monkey, Medusa. Who are these characters and where do they come from?
Wow, that's a really big fact juicy question. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it justice in the time that we have, although I even necessarily have an answer that even does the question justice, perhaps. So for me, first of all, just back to the paint thing, if I can. The paint for me is like the life force that permeates through all of my practice. So I look at paint as the blood, the breath of my practice, and I think that's because of the changing nature of it. It's the fluidity of it, but I also use it in quite a sculptural way. So I might use it in quite, like on Mambo up here, you can see it's on it. I kind of sculpt with it, or at least it feels like that to me. Sometimes I put like really thick layers down, and I let it set, and then cut them up and almost collage with it. So paint definitely is the kind of connecting life force through all of the entities. To try and answer where they come from, I'm still kind of working that out, and I still sort of get these surprises. Quite often things don't make sense to me until, after I've created something. So what happens is I get this kind of, there'll be a catalyst for a particular entity, and that could be a drawing. I do a lot of drawing out and about in collections, places. It could be a place that I've gone to specifically. It could be something I've come across by complete, chance. It could be an image. It could be an object. It could be another artist's work. And in that moment, in that very kind of instinctual interaction with that object or image or place, I see something in it that for me resembles this world. And quite often it's something that may not exist in physical terms in front of me. So I might see something, but see something else in it. So when I'm sort of drawing, so I was in Florence, which interestingly, Firenze and Space Monkey and maybe a few others came from a collection of drawings that I did when I was in Florence. And I was in one of the museums there, and I was drawing this beautiful like a Renaissance painting, but what I was drawing was so different. So I was kind of doing these like clown-type creatures from these two female figures, and this kind of couple came over because they were interested in what I was doing, and then they kind of gave me this really apologetic look of like, oh bless, she's trying, she's trying, good for you, because it's just completely different what's on the paper. So there's that interaction. There's a moment where I see something and there's something in it for me. And then I do loads and loads and like hundreds of drawings, and then some of those drawings I'll rip them all out of sketchbook immediately, and then they go all over the studio wall. So I go through this period of like hunting gathering, I call it, where I'm out and about, and I might not be in the studio for like maybe 2-3 months at a time, and I'll be out and about kind of just drawing, collecting, and then I sort of take all that back to the studio, and then again I'll go through the drawings, and then the ones that sort of jump out will go onto the wall, and then some of those might then manifest in different ways through painting or sculpture, and then of course they then start their own journey through the media that I'm using, and some of them might make it, some of them might not. I might start a painting with a clear idea of what it's going to look like, and then completely change it. Sometimes I have quite a definite idea about a piece of work in terms of palette or materials. But again, it's that very instinctual, like, that's going to be a sculpture, that's going to be a painting. And then there's this kind of fluidity between the two. So sometimes paintings become sculptures, sculptures become paintings. And I guess what's happened over time is it's kind of this collection of entities who exist in their own ecosystem that makes complete sense to me. So when a kind of new entity emerges, I'll get like a feeling for it. So I might not know what it looks like, but I know it's going to be quite mischievous or quite dark, or this kind of perhaps have a feminine energy about it, or quite playful or powerful. I'll be like, oh, it's definitely going to have rabbit features in it somewhere, or it's definitely going to be a rascal or a misfit. And it's just a kind of feeling of that's what it's going to be.
I found very interesting there as well, kind of psychological or kind of features that she gives to her creature. And I remember discussing as well palette. You were saying that certain, let's say the dogs or the angel, they are a specific palette. So all, when you are in the domain of making a painting or a sculpture that is an angel, then you go for a specific palette rather than dogs that have another. So that as well, how that differentiation somehow comes, and it's a thing that you feel is somehow, because how you talk about it somehow feels that it's some sort of a supernatural thing that is beyond you. And you are somehow just the mean to transform this energy into something else. So you feel this kind of supernatural drive that somehow makes sense within your mind.
Yeah, again, I guess it does feel sometimes. I mean, it's interesting being an artist because sometimes there's that assumption of, everyone works like this. But then when you have conversations with people like yourself, it's like, no, actually, of course everyone has their own practice. But yeah, it does feel like I guess I'm some kind of, there's all these external influences or internal influences or wherever they come from, and then they kind of all go in and then they come out. And I guess what drives the palette is, it's just kind of like a knowing, but sometimes it's a fight, sometimes it's a battle. Like I don't always, it's not always, it doesn't always manifest, obviously the paintings especially are much more of a battleground than perhaps the sculptures, because obviously with sculpture you can place things, you can approach it very differently, whether the painting, and because I work with acrylic, which starts to dry instantly, and I'm very patient, so I will dry it with a hairdryer, even though it dries quickly. And I like, so the paintings are definitely more of a battle, and sometimes paintings are many things before what's actually on a finished piece of work. Like I take things off, I stand things back, I turn things upside down. Yeah, so I think, although I might have a feeling, or say for sometimes, so I spent ages, about 18 months, which is really unusual for me, on a piece that was entitled Octopus Madonna. And after about 18 months, I was like, do you know what, it's just not, there is an Octopus Madonna coming, but that's not her. So I kind of let that go completely and just got rid of it, and then that painting actually became Space Monkey, and I was like, that's it. So there's a real history underneath Space Monkey that becomes part of Space Monkey, and without it that wouldn't feel like a complete piece of work. And then I produced Octopus Madonna, take two if you like, where I was like, that's Octopus Madonna. So it's not always a clean cut kind of, I'm going to make this and then I make it. And quite often I put paintings away and then I pull them out and then I'm like, no, that's not finished. And I've still got paintings that really bother me, where I just maybe I don't have the answer, I don't have the solution yet to kind of make it feel complete and make it feel like it's fulfilled, and sometimes that means letting go of it completely, even if it's been a huge amount of work. So, it's a bit of a...
One of the recurrent, I think, the star of your creators, which is very visible in the film, we will talk about the film as well later, is the Harlequin. And in the film as well, there's a photo, actually, of you quite young.
Yeah.
Impersonifying the Harlequin. So what does it mean for you, and seeing it as well from such a young age? Is it something that is within you since a long time? Does it kind of reminds you of much older, kind of when you weren't an artist yet, before going to uni, before all this stuff, and how could that develop from this kind of fondness to the Harlequin to then being your main character in your work?
The Harlequin is really interesting. So a lot of the influences in my practice, it kind of, when I was talking about surprises earlier on, one of the surprises that kind of comes along fairly often is the connections to past interests or past influences that are so deeply embedded that I don't always realise it until afterwards. And if I think about the programmes I loved as a kid, I was never interested in the princess or, the queen or Cinderella in the story. I was always interested in the witch, the monster, the troll, the baddie, anything that transforms, werewolves, vampires. I was always interested in that, and I kind of, because I was always interested in it, it kind of felt that to me was quite normal and usual. And so it was only sort of really through as my practice has evolved, I'm kind of like, with Baba Yaga, that there's lots of influences in that, and again they're very subconscious influences that I recognise the impact of way after I've finished a piece of work. So there's a cartoon called Will o' Wisp, which and there's this kind of like wispy kind of spirit witchy character in that, and that was really what was in my mind. So a lot of these influences are all kind of in there, sort of cooking, bubbling around, and then they sort of come out in various ways. Sometimes it's quite a visual reference. But to go back to the Harlequin, so I've painted the Harlequin. I've always been incredibly. I've always really seduced by the idea of the circus and the carnivalesque, and I guess it's because for me it represented a place of transformation, you know, for humans to become something else, and so I've always been really completely, but really seduced by that, and so the Harlequin was part of that world, and the Harlequin, I think, because of the Harlequin's history, you know, it goes back quite a long way. It's this sort of mystical character and this magical entity, but also something, you know, a character that deals with duality, you know, with the black and the white. And so, interestingly, so the image that Linda is referring to is at the end of the film, and it's actually a newspaper cutting from when I was very young, and my nan made me this handmade Harlequin outfit, and I went into this fancy dress competition, probably begrudgingly, and I won the first prize as this Harlequin, which I have always, it's obviously a special moment for me because I've hung on to the medal without really realising it. You know, you just end up with that collection of things, like not many things, but for some reason that's made the house moves, the clear outs. And I painted the Harlequin before, and I knew I wanted to make 2 films, and that one was going to be Colour Me White, and one was going to be Colour Me Pink, and Colour Me Pink was always going to feature the Harlequin. However, it wasn't until it had finished the making of the film, the shoot, the edit, so we're going like 6 months after the shoot, that the newspaper clipping actually kind of presented itself, and I was like, I'm going to put that in the film, because right there and then there was that moment of clarity of, oh wow, that's been with me a long time, and perhaps that's where that relationship started. And then it kind of scared me a little bit, which if you haven't seen the film, you'll perhaps understand when you watch it, because I was a bit like, oh god, is the Harlequin actually part of me? Like, is that manifestation in the film part of me? Because it's quite I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I think that is quite possibly the case. Mm-hmm. And it's, I guess my practice is much more autobiographical perhaps and personal than I first realised.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also how the Harlequin took over kind of the curtains and the sofa. And talking about taking over, definitely paint as well took over the show. I remember when we discussed about the insole and, you know, how we wanted the space to look like. She was very determined to have 2 walls, one yellow floor and one pink floor, which obviously, as I've been curating for the past 5 years, I've never seen this kind of, you know, fondness for fluorescent colours. Besides maybe a picture white cube in 2017, but there was a whole pink atmosphere, whereas you really wanted the toxicity almost of the fluorescent. Why? What do you find in the fluorescent?
Why do you like it?
Because ultimately, I think it came out to be fantastic, you know, and but I found it very brave as well, because lots of artists don't dare to work with material that they themselves recognize to be quite nasty for a whole series of reasons. So your determination to go for this was what really convinced me. You know, I trusted you fully before even seeing it, because it was feeling so right to you that obviously I trusted you, and then it turned out to be and look brave, you know, rather than the classic white cube salon-like display. But how could you be so determined and sure that it would have come out nice, you know? And how could you not have a bit of hiccups or, you know, of just fear that it might actually be too much, or, you know, what drive you to?
Well, I guess first of all, in my mind, there is never too much fluoro. Like, that's just, like, for me, there is never enough. So there was I never doubted it, not because I was sure it was a good idea, but just because, of course, you know, to me. And it is interesting that as a question, because I get asked a lot about fluoro. So because I was running all over town buying up every bottle of this nasty fluorescent yellow, and actually one of the art suppliers in East London actually said to me, like, he actually quite literally in this tone, like, so do you actually like this stuff then? And I was like, oh, I love it because it's just so vile, it's so nasty, it's so toxic, it's so like, even as an acrylic, you know, the binders are just so cheap, and it's, you know, this stuff on your palette is like cement at the end of a painting session, whereas all the other acrylics that I use, they just slide off, you know, you don't have to wash them, they just slide, because they're these beautiful acrylics. And this is just like cement, you know, it's just nasty, nasty, nasty. And I don't know what it is about the fluorescent colours that I just feel such an affinity to, you know, but they always have been there. Like I'd have lots of things these colours, they just don't make things these colours, you know. If I'd have my hair these colours, like, you know, I'd have everything these colours. I think they should make cars in these colours. I think they should, you know, like, things should be, the world should embrace the fluoro. And it is, I guess it is an unusual palette to work with, and I say that really because people comment on that often. You know, and definitely the fears that you talked about are very real. People are just like, oh, well, how do you do that? And going back to your question about sort of being so certain and so adamant about having the fluoro on the walls, it's something that's been cooking in here for such a long time, and it was, for me, it was just another decision, like, do I put on more teeth? You know, do I add some glitter? Do I put that on, take that off? It was just it was something that felt very right. It felt absolutely integral to the show, and I guess because the show has been in here for such a long time, that for me, I guess it feels like one big installation. So without the colours on the walls, it was almost pointless. You know, it was just like there's just no point in doing it, because then for me it would be work presented in a gallery space, in an art space. Whereas with this really just ties it together, and also because I guess I'm really funny about. So although I love pink and yellow, I actually cannot bear them together. So even when I have paint rags, which end up then being sculptures, you know, further down the line, I'm really quite careful in the studio of not picking up the wrong rag. But if I do, it literally will, like, that's got to go. You know, that can't. They just can't mix. So I just felt like I wanted this yellow domain for the inhabitants of the yellow world. So for me, they're like two separate domains that live side by side. You can't cross. You know, you can't cross from one into the other. You know, so they're kind of like the happy neighbours, but they're not friends. So yeah, it just felt really just completely essential. It felt crucial, it felt critical to me, and I guess that comes from the Misfits and the Rascals, which is an ongoing collection of sculptures which are not in the show, and they're like opposing gangs. So they kind of hang out in their gangs, but again, you know, they're not friends. So in my head, they're opposing. There's a polarity there. They're like these opposing energies, or these opposing realms that coexist, but never blend.
Yeah, look at me, I can feel how seduced you are by this kind of quirky, grotesque, somehow, you know, things that you would never put together, that kind of friction. It looks to me that you're really seduced by this moment of friction, and really, and you dare to get there, you know. You don't play in a safe comfort zone, but actually you try to really push towards somehow kind of unknown things. And we discussed a lot as well how the unknown is present in your practice, and how, despite researching a lot behind your creators, there's still that fascination towards not knowing where something's come from, or, you know, where it's going to go. And I found quite peculiar the association with the Space Monkey, because, for instance, you know, first look it's a black-white, but then if you actually look much deeper, you see underneath a whole series of other materials. So there's gold leaf, but again they are covered. So somehow to, again, you know, in a almost secretive way. So you are hiding more layers to the characters. Do you think that that's as well comes almost as a process of realization? So you expect someone to really face the work, and through time getting to notice all these little layers that you hide. So you are as well expecting a certain level of engagement rather than having everything first sight.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, because again, that's something that a few people commented on it at the opening, having perhaps seen digital, reproductions of the work, and it's like, oh wow. And I've had people that have do their own work and have it in their home, and even after like several months, they're like, oh, I've just noticed those little ghosts in the corner, or there's these shadows, or which is really interesting to me, because I think, as the person who's made it, I'm so intimately aware of every little part. But again, I think layers are very, very important to me, and I think it's because I'm not interested in location, I'm not interested in environment. I don't want to give too much information, not purely because I kind of just, it's really about the entity for me, and I'm always very interested in people bringing their own associations to that. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So yeah, I think layers are really important, but also they need to be integral to the painting. So a lot of the layers really come out of moving things around, changing colours, changing things, changing sizes, changing scales, and so they sort of manifest themselves through the process of paint, and they're always such a huge, for me anyway, there's always such a huge opportunity for the unexpected in my paintings, especially because of that process, and sometimes what I've got in here, I might do it and then go, oh god, it just doesn't work, and then I take it off, and in my head all I'm doing in that moment is taking it off. But quite often in that moment of taking it off, in that moment of not being conscious or sort of directing any kind of mark or movement, there'll be a moment of magic. I just go, wow, okay, now I can work with that. There's something in it, and then that sort of then leads on to the next decision, and then the next decision, and then the next decision. So yeah, I think it's partly process, but also the entities do manifest through those layers. Like that's how they come forward. So sometimes I might know, okay, I know it's going to be very ethereal and there's going to be lots of whites and off-whites, and maybe that's all I really feel sure about at that point in time. And I guess it's about permission as well, of not sort of getting too bogged down with any prescribed notions of what I've already decided, before starting it. So like the tooth fairy, I had no idea what that was going to be, no idea at all. And quite often I don't know who it is until I start painting it, and then I was like, oh, obviously, and then it feels very obvious. Obviously it's a tooth fairy, like of course it is. And I guess because I've got this sort of reoccurring references now that sort of just present themselves in the paintings, I feel like I've got this sort of vocabulary of features, and obviously because I use quite limited colour palette. So for example, if pink's going on, yellow's out. So, and if yellow's out, then there's other colours I probably won't use. So it can, it is tricky. It is a tricky. I do find it difficult, and that's what I really love about the painting process. I find it difficult. It's always a fight. And it's the fluoros really do make that difficult. But I definitely wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah, it's always a battle. And some days you sort of have, days where you're just like, I just don't know what to do with it. And on the days that you win, it's just,
I really like how you talk about it, like, again, this idea of the fight, but also, as you mentioned, chance, which definitely, in the 60s and 70s was a thing, lots of artists just based, especially conceptual, they based their work on chance aspects or things coming from unexpected circumstances or encounters, which I think it's a very interesting thing to do, and it's about being open to welcome chance, and as you said, to welcome this creator to manifest, or this thing to be just around you. Because, for instance, there's lots of the paintings and the sculptures, you get that, you build them with objects and things that you find in your studio. So it can be the cloth that you've been using to wash your hands or whatever. So it's very much as well based on, rather than a pre-fixated idea of how you want the work to look like and what you need to make the work, it's more like having this attitude of openness and really finding inspiration in the things that surround you, which I found very interesting and relevant and pertinent to the time we're living, where there's definitely an excess of things, and maybe producing new ones, definitely it's more critical than before. And in this regards, we see Mambo here, but so for instance, Mambo comes from, again, stuff you found around in the studio, and really has this kind of rough identity. But then the ceramics and porcelain, which definitely are not like, a found material, are not, but actually as techniques, besides being very old, are also quite elaborate. So, and I found so funny how you produce these crazy monsters, critters, because obviously as well in ceramics there's a layer of specialism. So, definitely, normally it's assumed that if you want to produce ceramics, you have to do a course, you have to know how, you need a certain craft technique to make them. And it feels to me that you just go there and just dismantle and try to, destroy all those pre-established, preset ways of doing things with your, with your drive and with your instinct to produce them, which, well, again, how did you face making ceramics? How was that compared to a more instinctual way of making sculptures?
Yeah, wow, another great question, thank you. I feel like you've been way too generous in that statement, but you are right in that I basically rocked up to this ceramic studio that is essentially for people that kind of know what they're doing. And it's a ceramic studio. It's actually turning up. I'm going to give them a mention because everyone there was so accommodating and so welcoming and supportive. And I rocked up. You can join as a member. So I kind of went there and not knowing anything. Yes, I've used modelling clay before. I've never used ceramics. Basically just like what clay. And I had this sort of colour palette in my mind, as I usually do, of them being black and white, because the thing with glazes is it's very difficult to get the fluoro. It's not impossible, but it's difficult, and I certainly didn't feel like I had the experience or knowledge to even start playing around. And also if you're using a ceramics, a studio's kiln, and you've got to sort of stick with certain materials because they fire at certain temperatures, so there's that to consider as well. So I had a sort of black and white palette in mind for all of the ceramics, and I went there with a body of drawings that felt sculptural to me. And the ceramics were part of a DYCP funded body of work. The films were part of the same body of work, so it was very new. And I just went there, and it was amazing. It was just incredible because I wasn't expecting anything really other than to go and just see what happens. And on the first day, got there, like, what clay do you want? And I was like, white, I want white clay. Okay, white, great. And then very quickly, I was kind of at this desk with this clay and feeling like a total imposter in this ceramic studio, because everybody was making beautiful bowls and plates and vases and all these gorgeous, people on wheels. And I was kind of like, oh my goodness, look. Oh. And I'm there like some 5-year-old at play school, literally just going, working in a completely instinctual way. Like, it was interesting how my processes and approach from in the studio of painting and, you know, making sculptures out of sort of packaging and things that are lying around. And by that point I'd done the films, kind of translated into this sort of, there was an immediacy to it. Oh, it was so wonderful. But I also, because I made that some of them kind of, it was an instinctual thing, and it's like painting, because the clay is, you know, it's malleable, and porcelain especially, it's like rubber. You know, so you can just kind of, and I just worked with them in a very instinctual way. So if I didn't like it, I just screw it back up again. I mean, it's amazing. And then I had lots of support. There's amazing technicians there, you know, who you can go to and just be every 5 minutes be like, you know, it's dry, I want to stick this on, have I done that right? And I ended up staying there for like 4 months, because I got completely, you know, I mean, I just loved it, and it was fantastic, and it was very sad to leave. But I do work like that. Like I said, you know, I have 3 months drawing, and then I'll get into painting, and then I'll drop that and really get into a different discipline. And then I guess the challenge for me was, how do I bring my sort of established visual language into the ceramics? Like, how do I do that? So then it was about playing with glazes, and playing about with, I guess, taking the existing processes of what you can do, and then sort of playing with that in my own way. And it was, the technicians were so great and open to that, because I'd be like, you can only fire it once, and I'm like, yeah, well, what if I just fire it 4 times and put more things on every time? And they're like, well, yeah, I mean, you can totally do that. So I kind of had to find out the rules, if you like, that govern, you know, the ceramic studio, and then navigate those to find a way of working that felt authentic and right. But it was surprisingly a lot easier than I thought it would be, and I didn't really go in with any expectations other than I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to kind of see what happens, a bit like the films, I'm going to make some films, see what happens. And I did it. It was funny. Like, I remember my first few weeks there, and people were coming up to me. So you work on this beautiful open studio space, and people work up to you kind of going, oh, so what? You know, what's that? What were you doing? Because of course they were very obviously not plates or bowls or functional objects. So people were really supportive and interested in what I was doing. It was really nice actually on the opening to have some people come from the studio and see them in sort of in the exhibition. So it was interesting but amazing, and I definitely want to revisit.
Yeah. So now we go to the kind of moment, the most recent one of the DYCP funded, where you produce the film. So the film is recent, and in here we have Color Me Pink, but there's as well a Color Me White, which is not on show. And to me it was a complete surprise, because I myself as curator, I'm interested in performance specifically, and whatever can come from that. And I've seen Kelly's practice before, and I was, I found very fascinating her work. But then when I saw her performing, I immediately felt that there was something quite astonishing for me, because it really felt like natural. And talking to the director of the film, it wasn't scripted, it wasn't, there was no score, it was basically herself getting into these characters and really performing there with such a spontaneity and hysteria, which is very kind of, again, natural, and it was proper of the live performance, so without necessarily constructions, and the director was just mainly filming her madness in action. And to me it was a full surprise, because I know you haven't been performing before. I know you have done maybe a couple of times where you were a ghost going around scaring people, maybe in particular occasions, but you've never even considered the live performance, which to me, when I saw that, I couldn't believe it. I thought you had previous experience, so somehow you were in contact with that way of expression, because especially from someone who does painting, then extending to sculptures, it's quite tricky to get into the live domain. There's lots of discourses, if you want to get into the academic debate as well, on there's almost rivalry, between doing live performancing and producing an object, and it almost feels like there's two complete separate schools, but actually that's not necessarily true, and the two things can mingle very well, as you demonstrated. So how do you feel towards this new almost discovery that you are prone to do live performances? Do you think it's a thing you will explore further?
Well, thank you for your comments. I mean, equally, I was shocked too. And I still watching kind of feel a little bit like I'm watching someone else. I feel a little bit disassociated with it. It was revolutionary for me, making the film. So the films were very much for me about, okay, what happens if I become these entities? How do I do that? What does that look like? But more importantly, what does that feel like? And I am the most, like you say, I've got zero, I didn't even like drama at school. Like I was absolutely dreaded it every week. And it threw up a lot of stuff for me, making the films. And I knew I didn't have to rehearse it. I knew, and I didn't want to. Again, it was like approaching the ceramics. It was like approaching a painting. It was like, I'm just going to go. And although, of course, we had the narrative planned out, and because we had a short time to shoot, there was that trust, I guess, in the creative process of, I know this. But there were also some surprises, so I kind of spoke all the way through, which just happened, which is not part of the film, and it was never going to be. But that just came. It just came in the same way that these guys, sort of through it being a battle sometimes, kind of just just present themselves. And I had a couple of friends helping out on set, and it freaked them out too. It was like, whoa, like who's what? Who's that? And I feel that too, even though I did it and made it. And so then that threw up. I felt there was a bit of there's still ongoing battle with like my artist self and my personal self, because my personal self, the idea of performing at a live event fills me with utter horror, genuinely. Like if someone asked me to sing at a birthday, I mean I can't sing by the way, or asked me to do anything, like I don't even like my friends singing happy birthday to me, I just cringe, I really just don't like it. It makes me feel very uncomfortable having that kind of attention. But my artist self, I had to just kind of say to myself, so I've got a background in teaching, and I had to sort of had a lot of conversations with myself and with other people about, do you know what, it's work, and that's me as an artist, and it's that sort of separation of this is what my artist self needs to do, this is where my practice is going, and I just need to trust and have the courage to kind of follow that rabbit down the hole. And I was really fortunate last year to take part in a larger supported event called Ghosting, where again I'll just mention it because it was so important for me. It was a moment of you know what, I really love this, and we basically, it's just to kind of give you a bit of context. There was you had to apply to be a ghost and to ghost this arts building, and Paul Mahan, whose proposal, who put the whole thing together, put out this call, and I saw it and I applied for it. I didn't even consider not saying, hey, like I would love to do that, and so I kind of rocked up there with not knowing who was going to be there, and we inhabited this space for 2 days, and everyone came with very different agendas. from all sorts of different disciplines and backgrounds, and it was just revolutionary for me as a person. And I think what I realised through that process by the end of the 2 days was, one, I love performing in a costume, which is key, the transformation, and two, actually this is really important for my practice, and I'm going to have to just, you know, kind of just get on with it, basically. But so we're going to kind of explore that as part of the show's programme, but I'll be honest, if it wasn't part of the programme and happening, I probably would find a reason to not do it. But so yeah, there's that battle there between my sort of personal self, and if that's the right terminology, and my artist self, this kind of push and pull of you know, this is basically, going back to what you picked up on earlier, I feel like the entities made me do it, you know. I felt I've got a bit of get out of jail free card there, and like they made me do it. I feel like it just feels that's where I feel like my practice is its own living, moving, breathing thing, and that I'm just tagging along for the ride, really. And rather terrifyingly for me, I think they're off to the live formative theme park.
I mean, there's lots of discourses as well around kind of interdisciplinarity, and you know, and what that means as well. Thinking about fine art courses, you know, what you know, all the sorts of teaching skills that you would need in this kind of transferable skills in this ever so dynamic economy, and I was reading how much actually this push towards interdisciplinarity sometimes can be detrimental, if that's the right word, for certain specialism that maybe requires years and years of craft. But I definitely think that, I mean, how I feel, that this is somehow the acme of your long working in 2D first, and then expanding into sculptures, and then moving into performance, where it really feels like you're taken. It's not even you anymore. There's not the end of the artist, but it's actually you're taken by these entities, and it's them, and it feels a very kind of cohesive journey to me as well. I'm quite conscious of the time because it's 4:10. So maybe if you have any questions, we can definitely have a look at the film as well. I'm not sure.
I mean, I think your work, for me, it really reminds me of kind of Jungian archetypes. It's almost like a really personal approach to that. Is that something that you consider, kind of others' views of what is going on in the head, or is it very much your own characters that kind of come up?
I don't know that there's any getting away from, you know, sort of archetypal influences for any of us. You know, if you're going to sort of go trace it right back. And for me, I guess, you know, when I think about what I was, and still am, completely immersed in, you know, that other world that's depicted in fairy tales and horror stories and films, and you know, like when I was a kid, and it remains my favourite film, it is Ghostbusters. I would watch that every day, and I absolutely loved it when that came out, and because it presented this other world. But of course, you know, within, I mean, Marina Warner writes. I don't even know Marina Warner, amazing. Check her out. Just one of my favourite writers. You know, she writes a lot about, you know, how fairy tales, how stories have contributed to our ideas around, you know, archetypes, and how they govern, you know, sort of values and belief systems. And it's something that I got really interested in when I did my MA, and remain interested in today, because it's easy to feel, you know, I'm not everything's, of course, it's not coming from me. I'm not this untouched, you know, person making work, and of course it's all of it is intertwined with my past and my history, my experience, things I've read, things I've seen, things I still read and still see, and there's lots of really interesting discourse around that, and I remain incredibly interested in where that comes from, you know, outside of myself, I mean, you know, and those influences, and it's because they sit within the subconscious, so sometimes it's easy to feel like they're not there, but of course when you start unpicking, of course you can trace those things back. So for example, you know, what Madonna is an archetypal female goddess entity, you know, kick-ass goddess entity. But I mean, a lot of my work, sometimes I've got a really strong feel for, you know, it will be, you know, there's sort of a female energy or a male energy, but generally they're usually asexual, so they're sort of, the gender doesn't always play a part. Like, tooth fairy is just tooth fairy, you know? Yeah. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a big juicy beast that when I have the time, when I sort of delve into research, like that's where I go. But do check out Marina Warner, and you know, the fairy tales about Angela Carter. I mean, there's so many.
But yeah, also talking about archetypes as well, the geisha. You know, I remember as well, previous world 2015, like Kami, like you had lots of Japanese as well. Yeah. Influences at the time, so you were digging into Japanese culture, and you were as well producing a body of works which was, those creators were somehow a reference to what you were researching at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I never have enough time, as of course none of us ever do when we're sort of making work, but I'm incredibly interested in, you know, cultural values and beliefs that present, describe, investigate, you know, supernatural forces and that belief in the other world that we can't see, can't feel, but know it when we encounter it. And I'm not sure where my fascination comes with Japan, because I've never been to Japan. I am itching to go and spend some time there, and I would really love to go and do like a residency there and spend some time there. And I have always been drawn to, I'm by no means an expert in Japanese culture, but it's something I'm really keen to kind of delve into and maybe have some experience of in a way that feels meaningful, you know, rather than sort of working from a distance, so to speak. So yeah, and lots of other cultural references as well, you know, anything that kind of really describes any kind of transcendence through ritual, through belief. And what's interesting about Japan is the ancient lineage and just how far that goes back. Like I'm in awe, really, of somewhere that I have never been. I must have lived there in a past life or something. I can't describe, because I literally haven't been there, but I did have a pen pal who, in Japan, when I was young, she used to send me, or her dad used to send me these beautiful Japanese and like books and you know, especially dolls, and I remember just getting these, just the stamps. I was just so in awe of this magical, you know, they'd come through the post and I'd just be like, oh, even the tissue paper, and I'd keep every little, you know, part of it. So it felt very precious, very like this place. Someone was sending me these, you know, with writing that I didn't recognise and imagery that I'd never seen before, and a doll that didn't look anything like, you know, the dolls I had experienced as a young person. And you know, perhaps that's where that seed was planted. Just you know.
In the fascination, like for the unknown. You said it yourself now, you know, things that I didn't know what it was. Which is...
That's the first time I sort of thought about that.
Yeah.
So thanks. Another little bit in the jigsaw puzzle. Okay, good question.
So these kind of creatures, are they all around us, or are they like personal to you? Because it's, you know, they go through the filter of your experiences and what you're inspired by. So I'm wondering if like they're kind of in your unknown world, or are they like all around us?
No, that's another really good question. Thank you. So for me, they exist. In on like energy planes or realms or domains that are not physical. So I create physical manifestations of them through painting and sculpture and film and ceramic, but the entities themselves really only ever imbue that painting, imbue like that is not Optimus Madonna. You know, for me, she's so universal. She's cosmic. You know, she's huge. She could pick up the world, the earth, and just toss it if she wanted to. So I could talk all day about the hierarchy and the ecosystem and the relationship between all my entities. For other people, I think once they're out in the world for me, once a piece is finished, I feel like I relinquish my ownership of it in a way, and I think what they then become from other people, for other people, is very much something that's changeable and fluid. You know, so I mean, I love being an exhibition and not without people knowing that it's my work, and hearing people's responses, because it's always so fascinating what people see, and people bring their own stuff to a piece of work. So painting of a harlequin that I did years ago was in a group show, and one person was like bought the painting for their lounge. I mean, it's quite, even for me, it's quite creepy. So that was quite surprising. And then at the same opening, this guy kindly took the time to come up to me. He just said, like, he was genuinely disturbed, and he was like, I've never seen anything so frightening in my life, and he was comparing it to horror films and a computer game I'd never heard of that was really kind of dark and freaky, and he was genuinely affected by this piece of work. And I just loved that, that spectrum of response to a piece of work. And for me, that's, once the piece is finished, I feel like my job is done. Like, I don't feel any ownership over somebody's experience of it, and I really like to embrace people's responses to the work. I don't feel like, no, it's not that. So like with The Witching, an artist friend said to me, I thought it was like an elephant on acid or something. Love that. I just loved it, because that's what he saw, and that for me is as valid as my own experience of the piece of work. So I would never suddenly go, no, darling, it's an oracle, it's The Witching, and then sort of impose my understanding of it. Yeah. I think.
Something to add though, which I found as well very funny during the install, is that though she imposed, well, it's not that she imposes, because the creature imposes well a hierarchy, as she said. So for instance, putting together the dogs and the ghosts was absolutely, and the way in which she said it as well, just really made me believe so much of this world that she lives in and she surrounded us with, because really, when she talks about her sculptures, the small ceramic pieces, it's not works of art almost. It's like they are a crew, a gang, So even doing that kind of window, we had to make sure, the ceramic piece on the corner there, we had to make sure that, the dogs weren't mixed with the rabbits. Which to me, to be fair, was, at the beginning, it took me a second look to even distinguish the rabbit from the dog. In fact, it's obvious. And she was just feeling it. It was so obvious, and so as well obvious that they didn't have to go together, despite being technically both animals, But she has as well this rigor when she talks about sculptures, which are not sculptures, are really almost like relatives, part of the families, and they're a crew, a gang, they hang out, and it's quite new to me, hearing an artist talking like this about her work, even without the pomposity of, it's a sculpture, but with really the humbleness of talking about them as if they were pals, which to me was quite unique.
Yeah, I mean, to me they are, because I know them intimately, but it's not something I have to think about. So when I made the ceramics, I didn't say to myself, I'm going to make some dogs today, or I'm going to make some you know, zombie bunnies today, or some ghouls, or like a clown type thing. Because I was taking my existing visual language and references to the ceramic studio, they just come out by themselves. And then it wasn't until I fired them, glazed them, and then I've got like over 300 of them. And it took me days and days and days once I got them all back to the studio to just like, oh my God, now and I kept putting it off, I've got to put them into their own ecosystem, right? And I knew they were there because I was like, I know there's some dogs and there's some rabbits came out, and but the process definitely is making them, and then I kind of know what it is usually along the way, or it comes from a reference already with permission for it to morph and change and shapeshift. But yeah, I am. So it's interesting, yeah, because you're right. Much like with the pink and the yellow. So I don't feel like I have the need to overwrite somebody's experience of my work. But in terms of how the work is placed, I don't know how I'd cope with somebody sort of buying a food dog and then buying one of the rabbit things. I'd be like, well, where are you going to put them? And are they going to be together? Because it's like getting a fish and putting it in the rainforest. It's just like, it can't live there. That's not where it belongs. That's not what it needs to live and breathe. So, yeah.
Well, that's very fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you for being so generous. Respect, And then she says, like, almost like she removes herself. She just said a rabbit came out.
Yeah.
She made the rabbit coming out, and she saw this as a rabbit. But equally, she removes herself, so a rabbit came out, which is again fascinating, compared to somehow maybe the most kind of romantic ego of the artist that really strives to make that perfect shape, whereas to you they come out, and
Yeah, it goes back to that instinctual. So I get the play out, and then literally there's a split second where I just go, rabbit is, so it's a bit of a kind of combination, I guess, of conscious references, but then that absolute split second instinctual move of adding that brushstroke, that moving that clay, adding that ear, and then in that, what follows that is in a very immediate recognition for me of, rabbit, give it another ear, and then the rest might follow. So I guess it's a combination of conscious decision making and subconscious influences, I guess.
It almost feels like, since we've been running the show, we've been also running the workshops for both adults and children. And what became really obvious that you are not just an incredibly talented artist, but an incredibly skillful teacher and guide. And I think I'm just putting this puzzle together, that it may be something that could come from teaching children, that we usually lose this ability to stick to this really, really instinctive move of looking into the object and just, yes, rabbit, it's there, and you didn't let it go, and you have this really really nice balance of this really instinctive, almost childlike old sense, but then having the teacher side, which is really conceptual, really knowing what belongs to what, in which word. It has a really good order, and it can't be broken. It's just a note that I...
No, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Because obviously, so rarely... so I've got a background in art education, and we've been running a programme of events here for adults and young people. And so people rarely, if ever, have... This is the first project I've ever worked on where I have invited the two to come together. So normally I would not bring my practice into any kind of work that I do within art education. Don't bring, the art education into my practice. And so it's actually the first time people are seeing me within the show within those different roles. And so that's actually a really beautiful comment and something that, I will really take away and think about, because I think that's something that's becoming more important to me, is sort of breaking down the boundaries and not separating the different work that I do, which I have in the past definitely consciously done, partly for my insanity, as anyone will know who has several different things that they do. But I'm kind of really realising how I kind of want to just sort of let go of that, and everything's become quite fluid, and it doesn't, whether I'm in here as an artist or in here running some kind of event or doing a artist and creative conversation, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing. And that's quite new. It's new ground for me. It's new territory for me.
I think you both touched something quite important, which is the aspect of art education. There's still lots of artists that are reticent to say or to admit that they work in the educational domain, because somehow, again, related to this idea of the artist that spend time in the studio alone, and that somehow, but actually the artist as pedagogue, and the artist that mix within educational context for all series of reasons, maybe because the commercial context is not enough, maybe because they need that kind of pastoral and kind of engagement and exchange with young, fresh people. It's actually very relevant, and I think it makes a lot as well in terms of practice, in terms of being able to communicate your work, to talk about your work, to talk about the work of others. I see often the separation between the artist as the one that does commissions or exhibiting galleries and institutions, and the artist as pedagogue, as teacher, as mentor. But I've always felt that, actually it's not really a separation, but the two things work very well together. So it's more kind of probably more like a position that should be dismantled, you know what I mean? Because there's loads of artists that actually work in education. And again, if you look at Fluxus, you look at APG, education was really into the job, the role of an artist, especially if you want to have a socially engaged practice or an output that is beyond the production of objects, the display, and then it's extremely interesting, and it's also where lots of ideas come out, because it's from the dialogue, from, again, the encounter. So I think it's definitely kind of a plus, to your practice rather than something else.
Thank you. It's something Linda and I have talked quite a lot about. So Linda's involved also in some really interesting research at the moment. So we talk about doing sort of education and art education quite often. I definitely, speaking from my own experience, have felt, that there's, I think, that place of separation, or that kind of that pressure to appear as if, all you do is, go to the studio, and that's all like that romantic notion you were talking about of, you live and breathe your practice. And the pressure to conform to that publicly. And I definitely felt like when I was at art school, I definitely felt a frustration at times when we would have, established practitioners in, and I'd loved hearing about their work and their practice, but I'd also sort of be a bit like, but I want to know how you do it. How do you survive in London, that's incredibly expensive? How do you do it? And that's kind of the golden question. And this comes up a lot. Like, I have this discussion a lot with fellow artists, with lots of people, within the art world. And there's definitely this sort of sense of this conversation doesn't happen enough. And I think it's fear driven, and it's a kind of inherited idea of what an artist is, what that looks like, ideas of success and what that looks like. And actually, I think we're in a time of a great time, a difficult time, but a great time to start changing that and sort of breaking down those barriers and breaking down that fear of, you know, being someone who has a multifaceted practice that encompasses other things. And I definitely feel like, you know, when I talk to art students, are you guys at Chelsea? Ah, that's right. And I'm at Chelsea too. Yeah, she's crew. I think quite what I see that makes me feel quite sad sometimes, and I definitely experience this myself, is, you know, you graduate and then there's that sense, or there can be that sense of, oh, I'm not making work full time, so I failed, you know. And I think we need to sort of take that away, and I hope that art colleges and people that were fortunate enough to work with students on BA and MA courses, you know, start to sort of build that into an art education of, hey, you know what, this is the reality of it. Not for everyone, right? Of course, there are many, many artists who, you know, their full-time role is their practice, right? I mean, that's completely possible, and I'm fortunate to be in a studio building where that is the case for many, many artists. But I think it's also helpful to remember that shouldn't necessarily be the benchmark within which, you know, people at college, leaving college, graduates assess their current standing with. I think it's dangerous. I think it can be disheartening. And I certainly saw that, you know, with friends of mine kind of come out and then feel like, oh, that's it. Yeah. That's it. Then nothing's happened. You know, I've not been given a show. I've not been given gallery representation. So, and then you know, that's a really tough place to be. It is tough. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, you know, it's be an artist, come to London. Give up your job, you know. It'll be fine. Of course it's tough. Of course it's tough. It's a creative industry, and again, it feels like an incredibly competitive one. But again, I think if you place yourself, if you can try and surround yourself with people who do not, or choose not to subscribe to that, instead of it being competitive and a place of scarcity and lack, it can actually be incredibly rich and abundant. But that's about, like you say, it's another conversation for another time, but it's about dismantling those sort of very old school, I would say, inherited notions of what success looks like and what that looks and feels like as an artist. Mm-hmm. You know, and I do try and say, if it comes up in conversation, especially with students or recent graduates, I'm like, hey, you know what, if you don't have a studio, that doesn't mean you're not an artist. If you have 4 jobs, that does not mean you're not an artist. If you don't make any work for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, that doesn't mean you're not an artist. An artist is something that is internal. It's who you are. You take it with you wherever you go. And that is something that, you know, needs to be championed. Thank you all guys for coming. It's a big ask at the moment. Like, it's our last free weekend day before we head into lockdown, so I appreciate you giving up your time and energy to come and hear our discussion today. Do have the show. Do watch the film. The film's 12 minutes, and if you're in a bubble, you guys can definitely take over the sofa. There's also a chair we can move away, and I'm sure we can restart the film for you if you want to kind of watch it from the start. And
Thank you.
Thank you.